Hey guys, it's Bube here. In this class, we're going to be drawing the human figure in graphite. I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite techniques and a deep dive of the process. For this one, we're going to be working with a photograph with a single dominant light source and rendering the picture from start to finish. Unlike my previous class on figure drawing, the focus of this one is going to be on the modeling of form. That is to say, how we can shape the figure to make it appear more three-dimensional. This class is for all levels, but a bit of prior experience drawing will make understanding some of the terms that I use in the lessons a lot easier. We'll be approaching this drawing in 3 stages. First, the blocking, where we'll separate light from shadow, a rendering stage where we'll be describing the larger and medium forms, and a detail stage that will comprise mostly of the fine-tuning of edges and describing smaller forms as well as the tactile qualities of the figure. At the end of this, you'll be ready to take on your class project where you'll be able to assess what you've assimilated and put your newfound theory into practice. I had a lot of fun making this and I hope you enjoy it. Best of luck to you all. See you soon. And in this class, our focus is going to be on creating the illusion of form and on making our drawings look three-dimensional. So for that reason, I'm going to skip the outline stage and just trace the drawing on paper. If you're curious about how I normally get my drawings on paper, you can check out my last class on figure drawing, and in there I show you my process on how I freehand a figure drawing to start. First on the agenda, we want to divide the values we see in our reference into 2 families, light and shadow. The shadow we will find in the areas receiving no direct light signaled to us by virtue of their darkness. In this photo, the form shadow is located around the crease of the back, the left arm, glutes, and lower leg, with the cast shadow extending leftwards away from the body. Based on the location of these shadow shapes, we can assume that the light source is located in the top left-hand corner, and our values are going to move from light to dark in these directions. In the shadow around the glutes, we can clearly see a core shadow, reflected light, and occlusion shadow. Once again, we want to keep our shadow values unified, so I'm going to minimize all that into one tone of the same value as everything else. It's very easy to be tempted to show a whole bunch of variation in this region. The more you stare, the more you see. However, in order for our lights to really shine later on, our shadows need to be somewhat muted. Ergo, at this stage, our focus should be on smooth gradations in value, even tone, and well-designed shapes. In this light shape around the left arm, we have some of our darkest halftones in the picture, with very subtle movements in the values and edges in this small area. The base value of this region should be darker than all the halftones we have so far, but only by a little. The edges are fairly soft all around, but slightly sharper towards the right border with the shadow than the left. More often than not, people tend to make an area like this lighter than it really is, so when in doubt, go darker. Currently, I'm modeling the values across the upper back, attempting to get it smooth and connecting it to the existing value shapes surrounding it. The average value of this region is interrupted by a light plane on the neck here, around the ear, and this depressed groove possessing a darker value. In the model's right arm, we once again encounter a familiar cylindrical form. Presently, we have the shadow values already established, so the logical next step is to render out our darkest halftones to elaborate on the lights. This is the shape created by this band of dark halftone. Before getting into the medium and small forms, you must first create its local value or average value. That value is going to be a little bit lighter than the value shape we have in this region of the back. Once that's shaded, I can then begin to darken its values towards the edges as the form rolls away from the center line. If you look closely, you also see that there is a lighter plane around the olecranon or elbow. which you can indicate by pulling out some graphite in that region with the eraser. Some other things I'd like you to pay attention to is the shadow edge we have here and making sure it's as soft as you see in the picture. Not to mention adjusting the contours, the actual shape of the arm if you feel like it looks wonky. On the left side of the back, we already have in place our shadow values and our darkest halftones, so all that remains are the lighter values, including the highlights by the scapula and the spinal column. I'll start by applying a few layers of graphite with my 4H pencil to knock down the white of the paper and fill in the tooth. From there, I'll introduce my 2H to get the value to full saturation. Beyond that point, I can begin to soften the transition between the value shapes surrounding it. If you look closely, you'll see that edges on the right hand side are much sharper than edges towards the left, especially further down. This is because the form of the back turns more abruptly from this region into that than from that region into this. I know I say it a lot, but now's a great time to squint your eyes, take a step back, and glance back and forth between your reference and your drawing. Ask yourself, what is calling my attention? What's popping out as incongruent? What looks out of place? Focusing on those areas and modify them to fit your reference. With the left side of the back finished, we are left with the lightest planes in the picture. I'll cover the entire area with some tone before diving into the left glute and increasing its sense of roundness. The glutes are a kind of egg-shaped form, so if you can imagine drawing and shading a sphere, you're doing a very similar thing here. We already have our shadow and the darkest halftones in the form of this triangular groove and these halftones. So all we need to do is connect those values to the rest of the back in a smooth and unified way. In the right glutes, the two shapes you're trying to merge are these. We want that transition to be soft, so we have to layer carefully. We also need it to be specific, so if you look closely, we can tell there's a difference between the two. Once I'm done with the glutes, I'll move on to the shadow around the left arm and indicate the darker region here. It's a common mistake to go overboard and make these variations too pronounced. If you squint your eyes and the values don't coalesce, it's probably too much contrast. At this juncture, most of the information our picture will contain has already been established. Over the next couple of minutes, I'll darken the hair slightly to match our newly defined shadows, drop the value around the light shape of the left arm, and better define the halftones in the right arm and leg. Picking up right where we left off, I'm making some minor adjustments to the figure, filling in white spots, darkening some values, and modifying some shapes. Not much is going to appear to be happening on screen, but these final touches are very important in getting our drawing to look the best that it can. Beginning on the table, I'm going to start rendering the values on the left hand side, which is entirely in shadow. There are two main value shapes, one much darker than the other. However, all the values here must be darker than anything else we have in the lights, on the rest of the figure, and on the right side of the table. The table is covered with a piece of cloth with drapes around it, obscuring most of the faceted edges on the table. For that reason, the edges we have here are mostly soft. The exceptions are these two regions, which are quite a bit sharper than the rest. As you build your values in the table, make sure to cross-reference them with the surrounding forms in the legs and hand. The relationship of these parts is essential for that table to sit back in space as it should. Returning back to the table, I'm trying to get those values even and connect their edges with those of the fingers. I try to be systematic in my approach. By that I mean I'm not trying to draw the entire table at once. I take it a section at a time, get each one right, and then ask myself, what difference exists between what I just finished and what I'm about to start? In this case, I'm moving from a darker part of the shadow to a lighter one with less defined edges. I just noticed on the right leg, around the hamstrings that there's this light band of value. This is a perfect example of a smaller form and something that's better addressed at a later stage of the drawing. I'm going to focus first on getting its shape right before working on the values and finally tweaking the surrounding edges. It's important to realize that the cast shadow merges into the rest of the background with soft edges, and those edges get progressively harder the closer you get to the figure, or in other words, they get progressively softer the further away you get from the figure. Horizontal and vertical strokes are typically how I like to layer my value. I find that when there is consistency in your application, you get less noise in the tone and have to do less erasing with the needed eraser to get to a good place. Also, use of the brush and tissue paper can accelerate the process of getting the soft smoky effect we want in our cast shadow. Adjacent to the cast shadow, we have this irregular light shape. It doesn't appear to be part of the shadow, so if we are to stay true to our reference, we must preserve its lightness. Personally, I'm going to make it darker than I see in the photo because I think it disrupts the sense of turning in the larger forms a bit. Everything in this region is pretty dark and I would like to keep it that way. In as much as this is an academic exercise, it is also art, and as such, we must allow room for individual expression. In the triangular shape here, we have some of that cast shadow coming through. The major difference between it and the rest is that the shadow here has a lighter local value. Unlike most of the picture, the edges surrounding these value shapes are fairly hard, so make sure to preserve that quality as you render that area. So much of what is required to make good figure drawings stems not just from our physical dexterity, but our ability to see correctly, ask the right questions, and pinpoint the differences between our subject and our work. Slowing things down, stepping back to see the whole, and remembering that our issues can only be that of drawing, edge, or value is extremely helpful. In this drawing, because we traced it, very few of our issues will be from the drawing aspect. So most of the time, if you are tracing, the problem is going to be one of value or edge. Having said that, it is possible to trace a drawing and still have it look incorrect proportionally, but it's less likely. Part of the rationale for beginning this drawing via tracing is to help you understand that you can attack these elements in isolation. As a beginner, it can sometimes be too difficult to juggle all those three elements at once, so creating a drawing practice where you focus on shading or rendering, like we're doing here, or just the linear aspects, like in the drawings you see on screen, can make learning a lot easier. Then, when you feel better equipped, you can attack all aspects at once. As we get to the end of this video, I would like to suggest that you make it a part of your process to conduct an after-action report. It's a military term, but in this context, it means coming back to your drawing a day after it's finished with fresh eyes and picking apart what you like and don't like about it. From there, you can now chart a course of action to getting better. That course might include doing master copies, finding a mentor, doing more preliminary sketches, or giving yourself more time to finish a particular drawing. All in all, this is a marathon, not a sprint, so we must enjoy the journey upwards despite its many plateaus. I want to say a big thank you to all of you for watching. You guys are amazing for making it all the way, and I trust that this lesson will be a boon for you in your drawing practice. Much love, bye bye.